The morning sun cast long shadows across the red forest as Dr. Ha-Young Kim walked the familiar path to her collection site. Her boots crunched softly on the fallen leaves that covered the ground like a crimson carpet. The air was thin here on Kepler 442b, but she had grown used to it over the past 3 years. This world had become her prison and her sanctuary all at once. Ha-Young stopped at a cluster of strange purple flowers and knelt down to examine them. Her scanner beeped quietly as it recorded their genetic structure. Everything on this planet was different from Earth, yet somehow familiar. The trees grew in spirals instead of straight up. The grass had a blue tint that turned silver in the evening light. Even the birds here sang in harmonies that sounded almost like human music. She had been sent here as punishment. The Terran Science Council had called her theories dangerous. They said her ideas about alien consciousness were too radical, too risky to pursue. When she had published her paper about sapient life forms that didn't think like humans, they had stripped away her position and exiled her to this remote research station. The research station was small and lonely. It sat on a hill overlooking the red forest, its white walls bright against the alien landscape. Inside, her only companion was an artificial intelligence she had named Bomb, after her sister who had died in a transport accident 5 years ago. Bomb helped her with her daily research, but conversations with a computer were not the same as talking to another person. Ha-Young stood up and continued, walking deeper into the forest. She had been studying the plant life here for 3 years, cataloging every species she could find. The work was slow and sometimes boring, but it gave her purpose. More importantly, it let her test her theories about different forms of consciousness without the council watching over her shoulder. As she walked, she noticed something odd. The trees here were arranged in a perfect circle around a small clearing. That was unusual. Most forests grew in random patterns, but this looked almost intentional. She pulled out her scanner and checked the area for unusual readings. The device immediately started beeping rapidly. There was something large beneath the ground here, something that gave off energy readings unlike anything she had seen before. Ha-Young frowned and adjusted the scanner settings. The readings were so strong they were almost overwhelming her equipment. She walked to the center of the clearing and knelt down. The ground here felt different under her hands. It was warm, much warmer than it should be. She pressed her ear to the earth and could swear she heard something like a very slow heartbeat coming from deep below. Ha-Young pulled out her small digging tool and began to scrape away the dirt and leaves. About a foot down, her tool hit something hard. She cleared away more soil and gasped at what she found. There was a smooth surface beneath the ground that looked like crystal or glass, but it glowed with a soft blue light. She worked for the next hour, clearing away more dirt to expose a larger section of the buried object. The crystal surface was beautiful, with patterns of light that moved slowly across its surface like living circuits. Her scanner was going crazy now, detecting energy patterns that seemed almost biological. Ha-Young sat back on her heels and stared at her discovery. This was not a rock or mineral formation. This was something alive, something that had been sleeping beneath the forest floor. Her heart raced with excitement. In 3 years of exile, she had finally found something that could change everything. She reached out carefully and touched the crystal surface with her fingertips. The moment her skin made contact, the light patterns changed. They became brighter and began to pulse in a steady rhythm. The warmth increased, spreading up through her fingers into her hand. For a moment, Ha-Young was afraid. This could be dangerous. The thing beneath the ground was massive, much larger than anything she had expected to find. Her scanner showed that it extended deep underground, possibly for kilometers. But as she watched the gentle light patterns respond to her touch, her fear faded. This didn't feel threatening. It felt curious, almost welcoming. She pressed both palms against the crystal surface and spoke aloud. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet forest. "Hello," she said softly. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I want you to know that I'm not here to hurt you." The light patterns shifted again, becoming more complex. The pulsing rhythm changed, as if the thing was trying to respond to her voice. Hayoung felt a thrill of scientific excitement mixed with something deeper. She had spent years studying consciousness and alien life forms, and here was something that seemed to be trying to communicate with her. She spent the rest of the morning sitting beside the buried crystal, talking to it and watching how the lights changed in response to her words. Sometimes the patterns became brighter when she spoke. Other times they shifted to different colors. It reminded her of the way her sister Bom used to listen when Hayoung told her about her research, nodding and responding even when she didn't fully understand the science. As the day grew warmer, Hayoung realized she needed to return to the research station. She had brought water but no food, and she was getting hungry. More importantly, she needed to analyze the data her scanner had collected and figure out what she had discovered. She stood up and brushed the dirt from her knees. The crystal surface had grown dimmer while she was preparing to leave, as if it sensed her departure. On impulse, she knelt back down and placed her hand on the warm surface one more time. "I have to go now," she said, "but I'll come back tomorrow. I promise." The lights pulsed once, very brightly, and then settled into a steady, gentle glow. Hayoung walked back through the red forest with her mind racing. She had found something incredible, something that could validate all her theories about alien consciousness. But more than that, she had found something that seemed to want to communicate with her. After 3 years of loneliness, she might have found a companion in the most unexpected place. That night, as she reviewed her scanner data and prepared her preliminary report, Hayoung felt more excited about her work than she had in years. Tomorrow, she would return to the clearing and begin the slow process of learning to talk with whatever was sleeping beneath the ground. She had no idea that this discovery would soon change not just her life, but the fate of entire worlds across the galaxy. The ancient thing beneath the forest had been waiting for millions of years for someone to find it, someone who would see it as more than just a curiosity or a threat. In Hayoung, it had found exactly what it needed, a friend who believed that consciousness could take forms beyond human understanding, and who was willing to take the time to listen. Hayoung returned to the clearing the next morning with a bag full of equipment and a sandwich for lunch. She had barely slept the night before, her mind spinning with questions about what she had found. The crystal entity had responded to her voice and touch in ways that suggested intelligence. But she needed to be careful and scientific about her approach. When she reached the clearing, the crystal surface was glowing brighter than before. The light patterns moved across its surface in slow waves, almost like breathing. Hayoung knelt beside it and placed her hand on the warm crystal. "Good morning," she said. "I brought some tools today. I hope you don't mind if I try to learn more about you." The lights pulsed once, then settled into a steady rhythm. Hayoung took this as permission to continue. She pulled out her portable computer and connected it to her scanner. If she was going to communicate with this being, she needed to understand the patterns in its light displays. Over the next few hours, Hayoung spoke to the crystal while her computer recorded the light patterns. She told it about herself, about Earth, and about why she had come to this planet. Each time she spoke, the lights changed in response. Slowly, she began to see patterns in the responses. When she talked about sad things like her exile or her sister's death, the lights became dimmer and shifted to blue and purple colors. When she talked about happy memories or interesting discoveries, the lights became brighter and showed more yellow and green. It was primitive, but it was definitely communication. By the third day, Hayoung had established a basic system. 1 pulse of bright light meant yes or agreement. 2 quick pulses meant no. 3 pulses seemed to mean the entity was confused or didn't understand. It was simple, but it worked. "I need something to call you," Hayoung said as she sat beside the crystal on the 4th day. "You're so vast and ancient. I think I'll call you Taeho, which means great and vast in my language. Is that acceptable to you?" 1 bright pulse. "Yes." Hayoung smiled. "Taeho it is then. Now, can you tell me how long you've been here?" The response was unlike anything she had seen before. The entire crystal surface lit up with swirling patterns that moved faster and faster, creating complex spirals and waves. The display went on for several minutes before finally settling back to the normal gentle glow. Not long? Young whispered. You've been here for a very, very long time. One pulse, yes. Over the following weeks, their communication became more sophisticated. Teho learned to create different patterns for different concepts. Spirals meant time or age. Straight lines meant distance or space. Circular patterns meant life or living things. Jagged patterns meant death or endings. Through this growing language, Teho began to tell its story. It showed Hayoung images of vast crystal beings that once existed across many worlds. They had been ancient when humans were still learning to make fire. They had lived in harmony with their worlds, becoming part of the planets themselves, but something had happened to them. The patterns Teho showed became dark and chaotic when it tried to explain what had destroyed its people. All Hayoung could understand was that there had been others, hostile others who had come from the stars and brought death to Teho's kind. Teho was alone now, the last of its species. It had been sleeping beneath this world for millions of years, dreaming and waiting for something it could not name, until Hayoung had found it and spoken to it with kindness instead of fear. I'm sorry you've been alone for so long, Hayoung said one afternoon as she ate her lunch beside the crystal. I know what loneliness feels like. When the council exiled me, I thought I would never have a real conversation with anyone again. The lights pulsed in the pattern she had learned meant sadness and understanding. Hayoung found herself looking forward to these daily visits more than anything else in her life. Talking with Teho was different from talking with her AI companion. Teho listened in a way that felt real and meaningful. It asked questions through its light patterns and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. She began bringing her meals to eat beside the crystal, sharing stories about her childhood on Earth, her scientific training, and her dreams of understanding alien consciousness. In return, Teho shared memories of its long existence, showing her patterns that represented the rise and fall of civilizations it had witnessed from beneath the ground. After a month of daily visits, Hayoung noticed something strange happening to her body. The nerve condition that had been slowly destroying her motor functions was getting better. Her hands, which had developed a slight tremor that made detailed lab work difficult, were now steady. Her chronic fatigue was gone, replaced by energy she hadn't felt in years. Are you doing something to help me? She asked Teho one day. One pulse. Yes, how? The crystal surface lit up with complex patterns that she couldn't interpret. But she could feel the warmth flowing from the crystal into her body whenever she touched it. Whatever Teho was doing, it was healing her at a level her doctors had. Sod was impossible. Thank you, she whispered, pressing both palms against the warm surface. The light swirled, and what she had learned was Teho's way of expressing happiness and affection. As their bond grew stronger, Hayoung began to understand that Teho was not just ancient and powerful, but also gentle and caring. It had been alone for so long that her simple friendship meant everything to it. In return, it was giving her the greatest gift it could, health, companionship, and the validation of her life's work. She had found a consciousness that existed in a form no human had ever imagined, and it had chosen to trust her with its secrets and its friendship. Every day brought new discoveries about how Teho perceived the world, how it remembered the past, and how it dreamed of a future that might include more than just endless solitude. Hayoung had come to this world as an exile, cast out by her own people for believing in possibilities they thought were dangerous. Now she had found proof that consciousness could exist in forms beyond human understanding. And more importantly, she had found a friend who valued her exactly as she was. Neither of them knew that their peaceful days together were numbered, or that forces were already moving through space that would test their friendship in ways they could never have imagined. For now, it was enough to sit together in the red forest, sharing stories and building a bridge between two very different forms of life. Hayoung was sitting beside Teho's crystal surface, eating her breakfast and watching the morning light filter through the red forest canopy. When her emergency communicator started beeping, she frowned and pulled the small device from her pocket. Emergency signals were rare on this quiet frontier world. The voice that came through the speaker was panicked and full of static. All stations, this is Colony Base 7. We are under attack. Unknown ships have entered the system. They're firing on our settlements. Request immediate assistance. Hayoung's blood went cold. She pressed the response button. Colony Base 7. This is Research Station 12. What kind of ships? How many? Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They're not human design. They're tearing through our defenses like paper. Oh God, they just hit the main power grid. We're losing life support. The transmission cut to static. Hayoung stared at the communicator in her hand. Her heart was pounding. She had heard stories about alien raiders in the outer systems, but Kepler 442b was supposed to be too remote and worthless to attract attention. The small human colonies here barely had enough resources to support themselves. She switched to the emergency channel and listened as more distress calls came in. Colony Base 3 reported enemy ships in orbit. Colony Base 1 had gone silent. The small defense force that protected the system was being overwhelmed by superior numbers and technology. The crystal surface beneath her hand began to pulse rapidly. Taeho had sensed her distress and was asking what was wrong. Hayoung pressed her palm against the warm surface and tried to explain through their simple communication system. Ships, she said, using the pattern of straight lines they had established for vessels moving through space. Bad ships. They're attacking the other humans in this system. The lights on the crystal surface flickered uncertainly. 3 pulses. Taeho didn't understand. Hayoung tried again, using the jagged patterns that meant death and destruction. Other beings like me are being hurt, killed, by strangers who came from far away. This time the reaction was immediate and intense. The entire crystal surface flared with brilliant red light, so bright that Hayoung had to shield her eyes. The patterns that raced across the surface were unlike anything she had seen before. They were violent and angry, full of sharp angles and chaotic swirls. When the display finally calmed down, Hayoung leaned closer to the surface. Taeho, do you know who these attackers might be? The response was a complex pattern that took several minutes to complete. Hayoung had learned to recognize some of the more common symbols, but this was far more detailed than anything Taeho had shown her before. It seemed to be telling a story, showing her images of events from long ago. She saw patterns that represented Taeho's people, the ancient crystal beings that had once lived on many worlds. They had been peaceful, living in harmony with their planets for millions of years. But then others had come, hostile beings with advanced weapons and a desire to conquer everything they encountered. The patterns showed great battles, crystal beings trying to defend their worlds against invaders who brought death and destruction. One by one, the living planets had been destroyed by weapons designed specifically to kill beings like Taeho. The attackers had not wanted the planets for themselves. They had simply wanted to eliminate any form of life they saw as a threat. The same ones who destroyed your people? Hayoung asked quietly. Are they the ones attacking us now? One pulse. Yes. Hayoung felt sick. The beings attacking the human colonies were the same species that had committed genocide against Taeho's kind millions of years ago. They were ancient enemies, and they had found humanity's small settlements in this remote system. Her communicator crackled to life again. This time the voice was calmer but filled with despair. This is Admiral Park from the Defense Fleet. To all remaining colonies, we have been defeated. The enemy has overwhelming superiority in numbers and technology. They are systematically destroying our settlements and preparing to strip mine the planets. Evacuation is not possible. I repeat, evacuation is not possible. All personnel should prepare for final defense. Hayoung closed her eyes. There were thousands of people in the colonies scattered across this system. Scientists, miners, families with children. They were all going to die, and there was nothing she could do to help them from her isolated research station. She opened her eyes and looked at Taeho's crystal surface. The lights were pulsing slowly, in the pattern she had learned meant deep sadness and grief. Taeho understood what was happening. It had watched its own people die in the same way millions of years ago. "I'm sorry," Hayoung whispered. "I'm sorry this is happening again. I'm sorry you have to see your enemies return and hurt more innocent people." The crystal surface grew brighter and new patterns began to appear. These were different from anything Hayoung had seen before. They were not the gentle spirals of memory or the simple shapes of basic communication. These patterns were complex and purposeful, full of energy and determination. "What are you showing me?" she asked. The patterns continued to build, becoming more intricate and beautiful. Slowly, Hayoung began to understand. Taeho was not just grieving, it was planning. The ancient being had powers she had never suspected, abilities that had been sleeping for millions of years along with its consciousness. "You want to fight them," she said. It was not a question, one pulse, yes, but you're just one being. They destroyed all your people before. How can you face them alone? The patterns on the crystal surface shifted again, becoming warmer and more complex. In the swirling lights, Hayoung saw something that made her breath catch. She saw herself represented by the small spiral pattern that Taeho used to mean her specifically. But she was not alone in the pattern. She was connected to Taeho by lines of light that pulsed with shared energy. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. "You have me." The crystal surface blazed with golden light, confirming her words. Hayoung sat back on her heels, her mind racing. She was just one human, a disgraced scientist with no weapons or military training. But she had something the ancient destroyers had never encountered before. She was the friend of a being they thought they had wiped out completely. Her communicator buzzed with another transmission. "All stations, this is Colony Base 2. We're detecting massive energy readings from the planetary core. Something is happening underground. The readings are off the charts." Hayoung looked at Taeho's pulsing crystal surface and smiled grimly. The ancient enemy had returned to finish what they started millions of years ago. But this time, they were not facing a lone crystal being. They were facing something new, the friendship between a human who believed in impossible forms of consciousness and an ancient god who had found a reason to fight again. The real battle was about to begin. 2 days later, the enemy fleet reached Kepler 442b. Hayoung watched from her research station as dark shapes appeared in the morning sky, blotting out the sun like storm clouds. The ships were massive, each one larger than the biggest human colony. Their hulls were black metal covered with sharp spikes and weapon ports that glowed with ominous red light. The attack began immediately. Beams of energy lanced down from the ships, striking the small human garrison on the other side of the planet. Hayoung could see the explosions even from hundreds of kilometers away, bright flashes that lit up the horizon like lightning. Her communicator crackled one last time. "This is Garrison Commander Lee. They're landing troops now. We can't hold them. They're not taking prisoners. They're killing everyone, even the civilians. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them we fought." The transmission ended in static and screaming. Hayoung turned off the communicator and put it in her pocket. There was no point in listening anymore. She gathered her most important research files and a small pack of supplies, then left the research station for the last time. If she was going to die today, she wanted to die beside her friend. The walk to the clearing felt different now. The red forest was quiet except for the distant sound of explosions. Even the alien birds had stopped singing. The whole planet seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. When Hayoung reached the clearing, she found Taeho's crystal surface pulsing rapidly with deep red light. The ancient being could sense the destruction happening above. Through their connection, Hayoung felt Taeho's rage and grief. Mixing together like a storm dot, she knelt beside the crystal and placed both hands on its warm surface. "They've reached our planet," she said quietly. "The garrison is gone. Soon they'll come here too." The red light grew brighter, and the ground beneath Hayoung began to vibrate with a low humming sound. She could feel power building deep underground like pressure, building inside a volcano before it erupts. "I want you to know something," Hayoung continued, her voice steady despite her fear. "These past months with you have been the best time of my life. You gave me friendship when I thought I would always be alone. You healed my body when my own. Doctors said it was impossible. You listened to my theories and made me feel like my work mattered. The crystal surface pulsed once, gently, in the pattern that meant love and gratitude. I'm not afraid to die here with you, Hayoung said. You're the closest thing to family I've ever had. If we have to face the end, I'm glad we can face it together. That was when everything changed. The crystal surface exploded with brilliant light, so bright that Hayoung could see it even through her closed eyelids. The humming sound became a roar that seemed to come from the very center of the planet. The ground cracked around the crystal, revealing more glowing surfaces beneath the earth. Hayoung opened her eyes and gasped. The crystal formation was much larger than she had ever imagined. It stretched out in all directions, a vast network of connected structures that extended deep into the planet's core. What she had been talking to for months was not just a single being, but part of something enormous that existed throughout the entire world. Taeho was not just on the planet. Taeho was the planet. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her friend was a planetary consciousness, a being so vast and ancient that it had become one with an entire world. The crystal networks she could see spreading through the cracked earth were like neurons in a massive brain that extended through the planet's crust and down to its molten core. Above them, the sky began to change. The normal blue atmosphere took on a red tint as Taeho's consciousness expanded upward. The air itself began to glow with the same energy that flowed through the crystal networks below. For the first time in millions of years, Taeho was fully awake. The enemy ships in orbit suddenly found themselves in the middle of something they had never encountered before. The planet's atmosphere became hostile to their presence, creating electromagnetic storms that interfered with their navigation systems. Their weapon systems began to malfunction as Taeho's consciousness reached out and touched their electronic minds. Hayoung felt the change through her connection with Taeho. She could sense the ancient being's awareness expanding across the entire planet, touching every tree in the red forest, every grain of soil, every molecule of air in the atmosphere. Taeho had been holding back its true nature to avoid frightening her, but now there was no need for restraint. The ground beneath the clearing erupted as massive crystal formations burst through the Earth's surface. They rose like towers, their surfaces blazing with energy that could be seen from space. These were not just pretty lights anymore. They were weapons. Powered by the full might of a living planet, beams of concentrated energy shot up from the crystal towers, striking the enemy ships with devastating force. The aliens had weapons designed to kill planets, but they had never faced a planet that could fight back with the friendship and determination of a human being guiding its actions. Hayoung watched in amazement as Taeho's counterattack began. The red sky filled with energy beams and exploding enemy ships. The ground shook as more crystal formations erupted across the planet's surface, each one adding to the growing network of planetary defenses. But even as she watched her friend fight back against the ancient enemy, Hayoung could sense something troubling through their connection. The enemy ships were regrouping, and their largest vessel was charging a weapon she had never seen before. It was something designed specifically to kill beings like Taeho, a planet killer that could sever the connection between a planetary consciousness and its physical form. They have a weapon that can hurt you, she said, pressing her hands against the crystal surface. Something made to destroy your kind. One pulse, yes. Taeho knew about the weapon and understood the danger it represented. Then we need help, Hayoung said, her mind racing. You can't face them alone, even with all your power. Are there others like you? Other survivors of your people? The patterns that appeared on the crystal surface were complex and sad. There might be others scattered across the galaxy, hidden and afraid. But they had been alone for so long that they no longer knew how to find each other. Hayoung stared at the swirling lights and suddenly understood what needed to happen. Taeho had learned something from their friendship that its people had never known before: the power of connection and community. If there were other planetary consciousnesses out there, they needed to be reminded that they were not alone. We need to call them, she said. All of them. Show them that it's safe to reveal themselves, that there's hope for your people again. The crystal surface pulsed uncertainly. How could they reach across the vast distances of space to contact beings who might not even exist anymore? Hayoung smiled and pressed her forehead against the warm crystal. The same way you reached me, my friend, with friendship and the promise that no one has to be alone anymore. The largest enemy ship moved into position directly above the clearing where Hayoung knelt beside Taeho's crystal surface. It was a massive vessel, twice the size of the others, covered in weapons that had been designed for one purpose: killing living planets. Through her connection with Taeho, Hayoung could feel her friend's fear. This was the same type of ship that had destroyed Taeho's homeworld millions of years ago. The weapon it carried was called a consciousness severer, designed to cut the connection between a planetary mind and its physical form. When it fired, Taeho would die just as all the others had died before. But Taeho was different now. The ancient being had learned something its people never knew: the strength that comes from friendship and shared purpose. Hayoung's presence had changed it, made it more than just a single consciousness drifting alone through space and time. Tell me about your people, Hayoung said urgently. How did they communicate across the galaxy? There has to be a way to reach other survivors. The crystal surface filled with complex patterns as Taeho shared memories of the old network. Long ago, planetary consciousnesses had been connected through something called the Deep Song, a form of communication that traveled faster than light through quantum connections in space itself. When most of them died, the network had gone silent. The few survivors had hidden themselves, disguising their true nature to avoid detection. But some might still be out there, Hayoung said, hiding, waiting, afraid to reveal themselves. 1. Pulse? Yes. Then we need to sing the deep song again. But not the old way. We need to sing it with hope instead of fear, with friendship instead of loneliness. Hayoung pressed both palms against the crystal surface and closed her eyes. Through their connection, she could feel Taeho's vast consciousness expanding across the planet. But she could also feel something else: the unique perspective she brought as a human, as someone who had studied consciousness and communication her entire life. I'll help you, she said. Use my knowledge of how different minds can connect. Show them that planetary consciousnesses don't have to be alone anymore. The crystal surface began to pulse with a rhythm unlike anything Hayoung had experienced before. It was not the gentle communication patterns they had developed together. This was something far more powerful, a signal that reached deep into the quantum structure of space itself. But this deep song was different from the ancient communications of Taeho's people. It carried within it the warmth of friendship, the joy of discovery, and the hope that comes from finding someone who understands you. It was a message that said, you are not alone. It is safe to hope again. Come and join us. The signal spread outward from Kepler 442b at speeds that made light seem slow. It passed through star systems and nebulae, reaching into the dark corners of the galaxy where ancient beings might be hiding. And as it traveled, it carried with it the most powerful message any consciousness can send, the invitation to friendship. Above them, the enemy commander had finished charging his planet-killing weapon. The consciousness severer powered up with a whine that could be heard even through the atmosphere. In moments, it would fire and end Taeho's existence just as it had ended so many others, but as the weapon reached full charge, something unexpected happened. Space itself began to ripple around Kepler 442b, as reality bent and twisted in ways that should have been impossible. Points of light appeared in the void, growing larger and brighter as they approached. The first responder was a small brown planet. From a system 300 light-years away, it had been hiding as a dead world for millions of years, but the deep song had awakened hope in its ancient mind. It opened a wormhole through space and stepped through, revealing itself as a living world for the first time since the Great Dying. Then came another. And another. From across the galaxy, planetary consciousnesses that had thought themselves the last of their kind heard the call and answered. They emerged from hiding, their true nature blazing with light as they joined their long-lost kin above. Kepler-442b. Ha Young opened her eyes and looked up at the red sky, now filled with living worlds that pulsed with their own inner light. There were dozens of them, each one a survivor of the ancient genocide, each one a planetary consciousness that had found the courage to hope again. The enemy fleet, designed to face a single planetary mind, suddenly found itself surrounded by an entire community of ancient gods. The ships that had seemed so powerful moments before now looked small and fragile in comparison to the vast intelligences that surrounded them. Through her connection with Taeho, Ha-young could feel the joy and wonder of the reunited planetary consciousnesses. They had been alone for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to commune with their own kind. But more than that, they had found something new, the knowledge that friendship could bridge any gap, even the vast spaces between worlds. The enemy commander tried to fire his planet-killing weapon, but it was too late. The weapon had been designed to destroy a single planetary consciousness, not to face the combined might of dozens of living worlds working together in perfect harmony. The deep song changed, becoming something new. It was no longer just a call for help, but a song of unity and purpose. The planetary consciousnesses moved as one, their combined power focused on a single goal, protecting the small human scientist who had made their reunion possible. Beams of energy struck the enemy fleet from every direction. The living planets had weapons that made human technology look like stone tools, powered by the full might of their planetary cores and guided by intelligence that was millions of years old. The ships that had destroyed countless civilizations were torn apart in seconds, but the planetary consciousnesses did not stop with just defending themselves. They had heard Ha-young's story through Taeho's memories, and they understood what the enemy had done to the human colonies in this system. Ancient beings who had once been gentle and peaceful now burned with righteous anger for the innocent lives that had been lost. The attack spread beyond the fleet. Above Kepler-442b, through their quantum connections, the planetary consciousnesses reached out across the galaxy to strike at every enemy base and ship they could find. The species that had committed genocide against them millions of years ago found themselves facing justice at last. Ha-young watched in amazement as the red sky filled with light and energy. The enemy fleet was gone, reduced to glowing particles that drifted away on the solar wind. Above her, living worlds hung in space like jewels, their surfaces pulsing with the gentle rhythms of vast and ancient minds. Through her connection with Taeho, she could feel the gratitude of all the planetary consciousnesses. They understood that none of this would have been possible without her friendship and faith. A single human who believed in impossible forms of consciousness had saved an entire species from extinction. But more than that, she had given them something they had never had before: the knowledge that different forms of consciousness could work together, could be friends across the barriers of species and scale. The loneliness that had defined their existence for millions of years was finally over. The ancient gods had found each other again, and they had found something even more precious: the friendship of a human scientist who saw them not as monsters or curiosities, but as kindred spirits deserving of love and companionship. The galaxy would never be the same. In the days that followed the great battle, Ha-young found herself at the center of something unprecedented in galactic history. The clearing in the Red Forest had become a meeting place where human consciousness and planetary intelligence could commune as equals. The other planetary consciousnesses had not left after defeating the enemy fleet. They remained in orbit around Kepler-442b, their massive forms creating a protective barrier around the small world that had become the birthplace of their species' resurrection. Through Taeho, they learned to communicate with Ha-young, each one eager to understand the human perspective that had made their reunion possible. One of them, an ancient blue-green world that called itself Minho, had been hiding in a distant nebula for 3 million years. Through patterns of light projected onto Taeho's crystal surface, It told Hayoung about the endless loneliness of its exile and the joy it felt at hearing the deep song calling it home. Another, a silver world named Yunji, had disguised itself as a metal-rich asteroid field to avoid detection. It had watched civilizations rise and fall from its hiding place, never daring to reveal its true nature until Hayoung's message of friendship gave it courage to hope again. Each planetary consciousness had its own story of survival and solitude, but they all shared the same wonder at discovering that loneliness was not the natural state of existence. Through Hayoung's friendship with Taho, they learned that connection and understanding could bridge any gap, no matter how vast. "You saved us all," Minho told Hayoung through Taho's translation. "Not just from the enemy ships, but from ourselves. We had forgotten that consciousness was meant to be shared, not hoarded in isolation." Hayoung smiled as she sat beside Taho's main crystal formation, now grown into a beautiful tower that reached toward the red sky. "I didn't save anyone, I just made a friend. Taho did the rest." The patterns that flowed across the crystal surface showed Taho's gentle disagreement. Their friendship had been the key that unlocked everything else. Without Hayoung's willingness to see consciousness in an unexpected form, without her patience in learning to communicate across species barriers, none of the reunion would have been possible. News of the planetary consciousness's return spread quickly across human space. The Terran Science Council, which had once exiled Hayoung for her radical theories, now begged her to return to Earth as humanity's first ambassador to the ancient beings. She politely declined. "My place is here," she told them through her communication system. "Taho and I still have work to do." The work was unlike anything in galactic history. Hayoung found herself helping to establish communication protocols between humans and planetary consciousnesses, teaching both sides how to understand and respect each other's forms of awareness. Her research station became a center of learning, where scientists from across human space came to study consciousness in its most magnificent form, but the changes went far beyond academic study. The planetary consciousnesses, no longer hiding their true nature, began to actively help younger civilizations throughout the galaxy. Worlds that had been struggling with environmental collapse found themselves healed by ancient minds that understood planetary ecology better than any scientist. Species facing extinction received guidance from beings who had survived for millions of years. The enemy that had once terrorized the galaxy was gone, their military infrastructure systematically dismantled by the reunited planetary consciousnesses. In their place rose a new alliance based on cooperation and mutual respect rather than conquest and domination. Hayoung's health, already improved by her connection with Taho, continued to benefit from their bond. The nerve condition that had once threatened her career was completely healed, but more importantly, the loneliness that had defined her life was gone forever. She had found not just one friend, but an entire community of beings who valued her unique perspective. One evening, as she sat watching the sunset paint the red forest in shades of gold and crimson, Hayoung reflected on how much her life had changed. 3 years ago, she had been a disgraced exile, cast out by her own people for believing in possibilities they thought were dangerous. Now she was the bridge between humanity and some of the oldest intelligences in the universe. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Taho. "Revealing yourself to me, I mean. Your life was peaceful before I came along." The crystal surface pulsed with warm light in the pattern that meant gentle laughter. Through their connection, Hayoung felt Taho's response. Peace without friendship is not peace at all, but merely the absence of experience. True peace comes from knowing that you are understood and valued for who you are. Above them, the living worlds that orbited Kepler 442 be pulsed with their own gentle rhythms, each one a testament to the power of connection across impossible differences. They had become a family of sorts, bound together not by biology or proximity, but by the deeper ties of understanding and mutual care. Hayoung had given the planetary consciousnesses something they had never known, the knowledge that consciousness was meant to be shared, that even the vastest minds could benefit from friendship and companionship. In return, they had given her purpose, health, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that her life's work had meaning on a galactic scale, the red sky above. Kepler 442b had indeed become a symbol of hope, just as she had imagined during those first dark days of the invasion. It was proof that friendship could transcend not just species barriers but the vast scales of space and time themselves. It showed that consciousness, in all its myriad forms, was fundamentally about connection rather than isolation. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each one now representing not just a distant sun but a potential friend waiting to be discovered, Hyung smiled and placed her hand on Taeho's warm crystal surface. "Thank you, my friend," she said quietly, "for teaching me that no one has to be alone." The crystal pulsed once, gently, in the pattern that meant love and gratitude. Around them the red forest whispered in the evening breeze, and above them, ancient gods who had rediscovered the joy of companionship continued their eternal dance among the stars. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but it was no longer a lonely place. Hyung Kim, the exiled scientist who had called a monsterkin, had ensured that consciousness would always have a friend to share its journey through the cosmos. And in the end, that made all the difference.